The following interview was conducted as part of the Price of Freedom project by the Madison County Military Heritage Commission to inform and enlighten young people and the community as a whole about the sacrifices made by those in the military on battlefields around the world. We wish to thank the Huntsville School System and the Lehigh Broadcast Center for their help in presenting this military heritage program. Hello, I'm Tom Kellemer. Welcome to our program. Our guest today is Joseph Viviano. Joe is a retired U.S. Air Force Major who served 21 years in the service and is the recipient of 2 awards of the Distinguished Flying Cross for his heroic actions as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. Joe was inducted into the Madison County Military Hall of Heroes in 2014. Joe, thank you so much for being with us, sir. Appreciate your time.
Glad to be here, Tom.
Pleasure to have you. First of all, before we get into the military stuff, tell us a little about your family. Now, you're originally from Louisiana, is that right?
Yes, from Alexandria, Louisiana. Born and raised there. Went to high school there, college at LSU. Kind of a
LSU Tigers.
Yeah, LSU Tiger fan.
Well, tell us a little about your family. You have brothers and sisters and so forth?
I have one sister, Earlene, up in Colorado Springs with a complete family and everything. My mother and father are dead now.
I see.
I have an aunt that still lives there. She's 95 years old.
Still, and you were telling me before the show that she's still sprite and, and very active, right?
Right.
Good.
And she was a wave in World War II.
Yeah. Tell us a little about you going to school there. Joe, did you become interested in flying during grade school or high school?
High school, yes. Yeah. My high school was a Civil Air Patrol squadron.
Right.
And so I spent 4 years doing all the stuff that the Civil Air Patrol cadets do and everything.
Yeah.
And
you became more involved in that later years. We're going to get into that in just a little bit later.
But that piqued my interest in aviation and everything. And so when I went to LSU, LSU had a 4-year ROTC program. Back then, remember, we had the draft. And so everybody at LSU, and most of the A&M universities around the country, had to serve 2 years in basic ROTC. So I spent all 4 years in ROTC, went through the advanced program, and got my commission from when I graduated.
I see. Now this was in the late 50s, early 60s.
In 1958 through 64. Yeah.
Now you took some time off from college, right, and worked. Is that right? Tell us a little about that.
Yes, I did. I worked for a year for an electric power company, and as a draftsman.
I see.
And then actually afterwards, since I had to wait for a flight school, I served as an engineer for about 9 months.
Really? Yeah. Now, how did you choose, or why did you choose the Air Force?
Because of the Civil Air Patrol, because everything was aviation
had
related.
Ties. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, tell us about now. So you finished up at LSU, what, 63, 64 at that time?
64.
Yeah. Tell us a little about going through basic training and flight school. Tell us about.
Well, of course, ROTC was the basic training for getting a commission and everything.
That's right.
So I went straight to flight school, although I didn't go straight to flight school because the Air Force had developed a special program instead of going through a complete fixed-wing flight school and you know, the basic and the advanced training, and then going to become like a helicopter pilot. They decided, because of the shortage of pilots in Vietnam, that they had a program where we could go straight through and get our wings from helicopter school. So I went for 6 months at Randolph Air Force Base flying a fixed-wing prop job to learn torque, and then on to Stead Air Force Base in Reno, Nevada, and finished up and got my wings as a helicopter pilot.
Why did you choose helicopters, or were you because of the
at
shortage?
At ROTC summer camp, I had flown in one, and in part of my college thing and everything, and gone out to Fort Rucker and got a flight in one, and I just loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
So that's why I had to wait the 9 months to get the flight class, but it was well worth it as far as I was concerned.
That's what you wanted to do.
That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Now you're capable. You can fly out. You flew all types of aircraft. I mean, during the service. But that was your fave, to fly helicopters.
After Vietnam, the Air Force decided we had to be universally assignable, so they sent all of us helicopter-only pilots back through the T-38 flight training and everything, and then into fixed-wing assignments after that.
Joe, when did you first go to Vietnam, and where were you stationed? I believe it was Thailand and Cambodia you went to first. Tell us about that.
Well, I was stationed as a missile support helicopter pilot with the Strategic Air Command up at Ellsworth Air Force Base in Rapid City, South Dakota.
Oh, okay.
And while there, they had a mission where they called the pilots out of SAC and sent them with some helicopters over to Thailand on a mission for the ambassador there with the Thai military. And I was part of a replacement group that went over. So I went to Thailand first.
But for the kids' benefit, the SAC is a Strategic Air
Strategic Air
Command. Right.
No longer exists, but they still have the bombers.
Exactly, yes, sir.
And we went to Thailand and everything. It was a temporary duty, so I was could only be over there for 180 days. As it turned out, though, we were in Thailand for about 2.5 weeks before the mission ended, and they tried to find a place for the helicopters and sent us over to Vietnam, and we joined a unit over there. We flew 13 helicopters at 9,000 feet over the top of Laos with T-28 armed escorts.
Wow. Okay.
Into Vietnam.
Now, tell us a little more about your missions. What exactly did you do in your
Well,
missions?
when we got to Vietnam, we were assigned to an organization called the 20th Helicopter Squadron, which later on became the 20th Special Operations Squadron. And they were flying heavy lift helicopters, doing transport type work. Our helicopters were small, you know, the Huey helicopter, and they had to find a mission. And what they did was they found the mission with the special operators in Vietnam. There was an organization called the Studies and Observation Group, which did all of the super secret special operations missions in North Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam itself.
Now, this was classified for what, few years after Vietnam? Is that
extremely classified back then, because the mission that we finally ended up doing, by the way, I spent 3 months temporary duty there and had to go back to my normal assignment in the States, and then 1 year later came back to finish to the same unit. And by that time they were very established in their mission and everything, and we were assigned to this Studies and Observation Group, and we supported the 5th Special Forces teams that were going into Cambodia, little 6- and 8-man teams with 2 or 3 American Special Forces troops, and then an indigenous group of people, either Montagnards or Nong Chinese or even Vietnamese and military themselves, being transported over by our helicopters into Cambodia, where we had no combat troops in Cambodia, but they were doing intelligence missions, trying to count the number of NVA regular troops coming down what was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and Cambodia and then into South Vietnam. And so we would put these little teams in, and they would go in and count bodies and capture a prisoner if they could, things like that, and plant booby traps and stuff like that. And since we weren't there, we could call on no resources from Vietnam itself, no fighters, no artillery, anything like that. So our helicopters, and we were configured as either as what's called a slick helicopter to carry the troops in and take them out, or gunships. And we had a very powerful little gunship. We had 2 miniguns that would fire out the sides, controlled by the gunners. We had rocket pods. The slicks had rope ladders if they couldn't land, or they had long ropes with hoops at the end, where if they were over the trees, they could drop the hoops out. The team would sit in the hoops and they'd pick them up out of the trees and fly them back to base.
I see. Explain just a little more about, I'm sure some of our students are studying about Cambodia being the secret war. Explain a little more, talk a little more about that, Joe.
Well, we didn't have relations very well with Cambodia at the time. Its leader was Prince Sihanouk, if I remember.
I remember the red name.
And so we had to do all, and it was kind of like what goes on today is that we don't have combat troops. We didn't have combat troops in Syria, for example, for a long time, or Afghanistan. But we still had to have the intelligence. So we did this all on the quiet.
Talk a little about being away from home while you're in the military, Joe. How did it affect your family? And you were married at that time, is that right?
Yes, fairly newly married, year and a half or so. But Judy went back to Alexandria and stayed with her parents and got a job and worked the time. And I came back and we went off to flight school.
Yeah. And the extended, what they call the extended military family, sure helped out back home with the wife and kids and that sort of thing. That was a big help to people that were serving overseas.
Well, actually, since she was on her own, basically, and everything, we didn't have any involvement with, like you would have today.
Yeah.
The extended families, are, the military is very good
Yeah.
at covering the families and everything nowadays.
Helps out so much. When you had some free time, however little that was, what did you do for relaxation? Did you get a chance to see any movies in your camp where you're at? Did you have movies set up or what?
My squadron was stationed at an Air Force base on the eastern side of South Vietnam on the South China Sea coast, in an old French resort town called Nha Trang. And that's where our helicopters were maintained, and we had a little hotel out in town that we all stayed in.
I see.
Had guards and stuff like that. But we actually flew the mission on the other side of Vietnam, about 30 miles from the Cambodian border, at another air base called Ban Me Tuot East, which had a special forces compound devoted to these particular types of missions. So we would spend a week or 2 weeks at a time on that mission. The helicopters would stay there until they had to be maintained.
I see.
And so when we were back at Nha Trang, of course, we were in a town. It wasn't a friendly town, so everything we did was on base, the officers' club, outdoor theater, things like that. At Ban Me Tuot, though, we were just in a Army compound, and all you had was your personal radio, and we had a little tent that we used for briefings that we showed movies in, and that was it.
Good to see a little piece of back home.
A lot of reading books.
Yeah. Now, you didn't have email, you couldn't text anyone back then, but you were able to get regular mail from time to time.
Yes.
How often was that, Joe, and how long did it normally take to get a letter from home?
Oh, most probably about a week for one way, for it to go one way. So if you sent a letter home with something and had to be answered, it would take a couple of weeks before you get back. Also sent, we had cassette tapes.
Oh, okay.
Most people probably don't know what cassette tapes are. In fact, I just saw a video where some young kids were trying to figure out what a Walkman was with the cassettes, and they couldn't do it.
Yeah. Innovation back then, right?
Yes.
Of course, no cell phones, but did you occasionally get to talk on the phone with Judy back home?
One time, they had what's called a MARS type station, military affiliate radio system there, and you had to sign up for it and wait for sometimes weeks to get a shot. So I got one chance to talk to her during that whole time.
Wow.
Now, we did have R&R, rest and recreation,
right,
which they gave us 2 weeks to go off back to the States, or we went to Hawaii, met in Hawaii.
Great.
And then we also had about a week's leave while I went to Thailand on my leave.
I see, yeah. Joe, you were stationed in several countries in Southeast Asia, as you've mentioned. Describe that you're a pilot. Describe the areas you were in, how it was. What did the country look like?
Well, Vietnam has everything from open plains and lots of water and rivers and everything in the south to mountainous country in the central highlands, and we performed just north of the central highlands. So it was mountainous. And then further up north, it would be fairly heavy jungle. But a lot of the land looked not a lot different than North Alabama looks.
Yeah. Especially up north, it was more a mountain.
In the central part.
In the central, yeah, right.
Heavy forest a lot, where there would be openings. And of course, the people there did what they call slash and burn. They would cut down the forest and turn it into farmlands and everything. So you would have forest and open land.
Right.
Lots of rice paddies.
Right. Joe, as we mentioned earlier, you were twice awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for your heroic actions in Vietnam. Tell us about the battles or combat action that led to you receiving these Valor Awards. Just take us through that.
Okay, I got two what's called the DFC.
Right.
We call it the DFC,
Right.
Distinguished Flying Cross. And the first one was, I had served a tour in slicks. I chose to become a gunship pilot, and so they said, okay, you're going to serve a tour in a slick first.
Which is more to
1
carry
or 2
troops.
weeks, yeah, right, carrying the troops around. And I had one tour as a gunship co-pilot, And then on my second tour, which was in August of '68, we were sent up north of the Bambi-Tuoht base on a different mission, and we were there for 2 days, and the weather was so bad we had to cut that short and come back. Well, we got back to the compound, and that night, 2 regiments of North Vietnamese Army attacked the camp that was just to the west of us that we normally sat in the gunships. We would sit strip alert waiting for our team so we could be close to them.
Right.
And they overran. It was on 2 hills, a large hill and a small hill with a little road running down to a rubberized runway about 2,500 feet long with a little Montagnard village next to it. And we had been sitting strip alert there for weeks, and they had been infiltrating through this whole time. So in the plantations next to us and everything, while we were sitting out there in the open on that ramp, the NVA Army was
You were being attacked.
was infiltrating in. Yeah. So anyway, they attacked and they took the little hill the first night. There were a couple of thousand of them, and fierce battle. A couple of the Special Forces troops there got killed. Intense battle, mortars going off and everything. And the next morning, what they did was they asked for gunships to come in between the fighters that were supporting the camp.
Right.
So I was in the second group that went that morning, and we went there and we hovered. We flew around waiting until the FAC called us in between the fighter sticks that would come in, and we went and played like what we called the spooky, the fixed-wing gunship, because we had miniguns and rockets. We couldn't get down close because the ground fire was just so intense. So we had to stay up about 2,000 feet and just fire our miniguns down wherever the FAC wanted us to, and fire the rockets. Well, we did that for a while. Of course, it's a 2-ship element is what it is, and I was the co-pilot and the lead bird, and we expended our ammunition in our bird, and the second bird had about 500 rounds left, so we started home. As we were about a minute out, the FAC comes on the air and said an F-100 fighter pilot had just ejected over the camp, and he was parachuting into the camp. So I looked over at my pilot, and Bill says, "What are we supposed to do?" And I said, "I think we're supposed to go back."
Right.
So there we were now, basically a slick thing, only our personal weapons. We had nothing else to support us. So we flew back west, passed over the camp and the village, and we could see the chute on top of draped over one of the hooches down there. Turned around and made a landing and came to a hover. And on the way down, Bill Davis, the pilot, told Chuck Crabb, the number 2 guy, he had about 500 rounds left in his minigun, one of his miniguns, and he said, "Do whatever you can for us."
Right.
So we came to a hover over the chute, and everything broke loose at that point. People running everywhere, gunfire going off. And by the way, you could hear the gunfire, the small arms fire, even from 2,000 feet. It sounded like a popcorn machine the whole time we were there. And looked around, tried to find the pilot and everything, and I looked down and I saw he was in a group of green-colored fatigued people, his head down, running like mad toward the road next to the village. And I looked over and there was an ambulance and a Jeep there. And evidently, the Special Forces people from the camp had come down between those 2 hills and had met up with him and the bad guys, and they were running. They didn't even see us up there.
Right.
So about that time, Chuck Crabb came flying over the top of us, screaming he'd been hit. He had wounded on board and everything. So we couldn't do anything from that point, so we followed him out and left. But we were actually instrumental in drawing attention away from them so they could get to the vehicles and back in again. Bill was awarded and Chuck were awarded Silver Stars, and the 2 by the way, the co-pilot, his bird, on his first tour on the mission, the bullet came up and split his arm. That was the wounded.
I see.
And we both got DFCs on that one.
I see. And the other award, the next DFC
the next one,
was...
I don't remember the circumstances on that. We had so many of those little... Whenever the teams would get in trouble, we would have, it would be a hot time getting them out, getting them out again, yes. But it occurred about a month later.
I see. I see.
It actually over in Cambodia that time.
I see. And you had mentioned the fact, and you were talking about forward air control of some
Right.
of the kids that may not know exactly what that was. Joe, how would you describe to young people what it's like to serve in a war zone? The thoughts you have of possibly being killed or wounded during battle.
Well, of course, that's always with you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody's scared over there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what you were there to do. You had to do it.
Mm-hmm. You have a mission and you have to carry it out.
Yeah.
I know people often wonder, is it okay to be afraid or scared during combat? How would you answer that?
Sure, and I've got a story about it.
Okay.
On my very last tour, we were up north again, flying out of a base called Pleiku, and flying missions over just south of the Laotian border in Cambodia. And I was in the second, and we had all the gunships and slicks there because we were away from the combat,
Right.
our main base. And I was in the number 2 set of gunships. And the first set of gunships were sitting strip alert for a team that was in Cambodia. Mm-hmm. And the team got compromised, and so they took off and went to support them. Well, our element was then called up to go replace them at the strip alert location in case we were needed. Mm-hmm. Well, I remember we jumped in the helicopters and started them. I looked over at the runway, and the transport airplane that was there to change the crews with the replacement crews and everything was just landing. And then my number 2 guy said he couldn't get his helicopter started. So I had to go off by myself, went to the strip alert site. As soon as I got there, they called and said one of our other gunships had been shot down, and they needed me. So I took off, got up to about 2,000 feet, flew until we found them, and I was up there, and I could see the other gunship still flying around the location where the team was, and I couldn't go down. I couldn't make myself descend down and do it. So finally he came on the air and said, "Get your you-know-what down here." And that did it. I went down.
That prompted you.
Yeah, I went down, almost crashed during that thing. Came back and had a bullet hole in the rotor blade. But I was scared. I just couldn't make myself go down until he came on and said, "Get down here."
And that gave you the ultimate kick in the you-know-what, right? Joe, when people mention your Valor Awards and call you a hero, how does that make you feel?
Well, it makes you feel humble, of course.
And you've talked to a lot of people about this. I mean, other veterans, I guess, and all of them basically feel the same way, don't they?
Right.
Yeah. Was this period your most fearful time? I think you just explained that, but it was probably your most fearful time in Vietnam. Would you say that, characterize that as?
Well, during the temporary duty, 3 months I was over there, I was just flying missions, so flew all over South Vietnam and just doing odd jobs and stuff. But on the actual combat mission, it was fearful. And of course we were susceptible to being mortar attacked in the compound over there, even at the main base back at Nha Trang. And they did that all the time.
You're always in harm's way.
Rockets coming in, or mortars coming in, that kind of thing.
Now, your unit, the 20th, I believe you mentioned, aviation unit, correct, you can correct me on that, but that was the only Air Force helicopter unit in Vietnam, is that right?
Well, actually not. I said we joined that transport unit, but then they were moved to Thailand to do missions in Thailand. And when I came back for permanent station, and we had an agreement with the Army that the Army was going to do the helicopters and the Air Force was going to do the fixed wing work.
Right.
So, but they left our unit there, and we were the only non-rescue helicopter unit during my tour there.
And you've talked, we've talked about this a little bit before. I mean, this was an honor for you to serve with this unit. You've talked about that.
It was a tremendous unit. I mean, we were going over there in unmarked helicopters, where anytime we would be shot down and captured, I mean, we could be even treated as spies maybe.
Right.
And the unit was something. Because of the fact that everything was so classified, we couldn't put in for the medals. We just didn't have the resources to describe what we were doing because it had to be classified. And we didn't have the resources to write all that up. So most of the time we were saying that the stuff happened somewhere in Vietnam and not in Cambodia. And so the medals that were awarded were, you know, not real medal, you know, the quality medals that they should have been. However, despite that fact, we had a Medal of Honor winner, James Fleming. We had 6 Air Force Crosses, and I can't tell you how many Silver Stars out of that one unit in the time between 1967 and 1972 that they were over there.
Joe, I'm sure you've thought about it through the years. Share with us, or who prepared you. Share with us what or who prepared you to take the actions you did in combat. Was there one person in your life, or somebody in basic training, your dad?
No, this was all brand new to you when you went over. I mean, I was just a lieutenant going. Well, I made captain on the way over there, so I'd been in 3 years already. But I had gone through a combat crew training school, of course,
So
to learn how to fly the machine and everything.
Those tough sergeants and lieutenants that you worked under in basic and that sort of thing, that helped.
Well, see, I've never went through what's called a basic training,
I
like
see.
most people do today, where you were under the control of the sergeant and everything.
Right.
I mean, ROTC was entirely different.
Right. You served in a war, and through the years, I'm sure you've seen a few war movies anyway. Do you think war is depicted accurately in most of the movies you've seen?
Most of them not. It's glamorized, but there are 2 or 3 of them that are really good. I would suggest, anybody's interested, the best series I saw was Band of Brothers. I think that is the most accurate looking concept. You know,
The World War II drama. Right.
Saving Private Ryan was very realistic but gory at the beginning, and I think that was most probably a better portrayal of what it was like landing on D-Day than anything. The sounds are just unbelievable.
Yeah, it was a good movie. Very good movie. Do you often wonder, would you do it all over again?
Well, sure.
Yeah. Just to,
I mean, that was the job.
and you had a mission and a job, and you had to do that.
I mean, we all knew going into the Air Force at that time that we were going to be called up to go into Vietnam.
Do you still stay in contact with any of your friends, fellow servicemen?
We've had about 3 reunions since then. This was a long time ago now. I mean, back in '68 now. Actually, though, I just found out that at the Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, next September, they're going to dedicate a special section for the 20th Special Operations Squadron, which, by the way, still exists today.
Really?
And it has
in 2016,
yes, flying Ospreys up at Cannon Air Force Base, New Mexico.
Wow.
And of course, they transitioned to what were called the Pavlo H-53 helicopters throughout the 9/11 and the Iraq and Afghanistan war until the Ospreys came along and replaced them. So the 20th existed throughout that whole time and still exists.
Wow. Oh. So I'm sure you'll go up to Wright-Patterson
for the dedication. It'll be dedicated to both the 20th and the subsequent 20th missions, and to the Studies and Observation Group people, the Special Forces troops and all that we served with.
Well, it can now be known in the museum what you guys did, and how fortunate.
Actually, at that museum is a helicopter I flew.
Really?
And also at the Warner Robins Air Aviation Museum is a helicopter I flew.
Wow. That's quite an honor.
In Vietnam.
Yeah. Joe, what is your favorite memory from serving in Vietnam and in the Air Force?
Well, Vietnam was just the satisfaction of being able to support those troops, because they had nobody else to call on except us. In the Air Force, my last assignment was flying out of England in a long-range rescue helicopter, air refuelable a whole bit, and flying through a pass in the Alps, coming out the other side and looking over all of northern Italy in sunshine, or going through the Moroccan Atlas Mountains, because you couldn't fly over them, going through them and watching these little villages in caves in the mountains at about 7,000 or 8,000 feet.
That was in the 80s? Or is that
This was in the 80s.
Yeah, Now you stayed in the Air Force over 20 years. What did you do? We're out of the Air Force. What did you do following your time in service? You got out, what, 86, I believe?
I got out in 86, and I had a master's degree that I got while I was on duty, but it didn't really qualify for me to anything. So I looked around and said, well, what's a good career to get into? And computers was a big thing back then. So I went back to school, using the rest of my GI Bill, and got a Master's of Science in Computer Information Systems, and got hired immediately by USAA, the financial company that caters to the military, and served with them for 17 and a half years.
Wow. And you and Judy already had, I think your daughter's name's Kathleen, is that right?
Daughter's name's Kathleen.
You already had a child, yeah.
Yes.
Now that was before you got out of the service, so your daughter was born, is that correct?
Oh yes, she was born in '63.
Yeah, I see, okay. Now what brought you to the Huntsville area? I think you're going to, I know what you're going to say, grandchildren, right? But talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, they were living with us in San Antonio. We retired in San Antonio. Then Kathleen's husband got a job in Huntsville, and so they moved here. And after a couple of years and everything, they just said, come join us. You know, you're going to miss the grandkids growing up and everything. So we did that. Yeah. Sold a house in San Antonio and moved here. And we live about 4 miles away from them.
I got a little ahead of myself here. I want to go back and touch on some of the things that you did after you came back from Vietnam. And I think you served as a T-38 instructor, as well as you mentioned earlier, you served overseas. Talk about that period after Vietnam, before
I had to do the fixed wing conversion, so I served as a T-38 instructor with a German-American flying training wing up in North Texas. Then I was assigned to an outfit called the Instrument Flight Center, the Air Force Instrument Flight Center at Randolph Air Force Base, back in San Antonio, flying Hueys again. And then I got assigned as a staff officer at a Major Air Command headquarters up in Andrews Air Force Base. And of course, I flew there. I flew what was called the Saberliner, or the T-39, which is a VIP. Fly the generals around.
You flew the generals around, yeah, okay.
Right, and that was another fixed wing mission. Yeah.
I see. How long did you serve there?
4 years.
I see. Yeah. So what? Occasionally you would escort a senator or something like that.
We would fly generals and some fairly high-ranking generals, and occasionally a congressman or two.
Yeah. Did you enjoy that work?
It was kind of a hard job to do because it was an extra duty. So you had to take off and do that and still do your regular staff job and everything. And so it got to be a little bit different because it took all day long to do that. I mean, but I did get a chance to see President Carter getting on and off the Air Force One.
Yeah.
I got a chance to see the Washington Iran hostages when they came back.
Oh, okay.
Come off the airplane and to meet him the day President Reagan got inaugurated.
Yeah. Now, was after this you served in England at the rescue squad?
Then I served as a long-range helicopter aircraft commander out of southern England.
Yeah. Joe, you flew all types of helicopters. I know you flew all fixed wing as well, but all types of helicopters, right?
Well, basically, too, the Huey.
Yeah.
Most of my time's in the Huey, and then the H-53.
Joe, even before your time in service, and we touched on this a little bit earlier in the interview, you were involved in the Civil Air Patrol, and since coming to Huntsville, you have become more involved, especially with young people in the CAP. Tell us about your interest in this very worthwhile endeavor.
Well, I had been a CAP cadet for 4 years back in the 50s, and we did everything. You know. But Civil Air Patrol is an outstanding organization, absolutely outstanding. It's been a civilian auxiliary of the Air Force since World War II. In fact, the people that served in World War II back then just all received the Congressional Gold Medal. But just recently, Civil Air Patrol has now become part of the Air Force's total force. So we're no longer just an extra auxiliary, we're actually part of the Air Force, officially part of the Air Force. Our missions are, we have 3 missions. Emergency services, where we have pilots and airplanes, and we go out and do emergency things for catastrophes and everything, looking for downed aircraft, lost aircraft, drug work,
surveillance,
surveillance and stuff like that. All sorts of flying missions like that. We have ground teams that go out, during a catastrophe or to look for a downed aircraft. And so that's the emergency services part. We also have cadet programs because we have cadets, and they do all sorts of things. I mean, we do everything aviation related, and aerospace, actually aerospace related, that you can think of. And then the third mission is aerospace education, where we are tasked to go ahead and take our youth and teach them about aviation, about space, about anything STEM related, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, which is heavy in schools nowadays.
Exactly,
too.
yes, sir.
And we offer that kind of education to the cadets, and we also offer, Civil Air Patrol also offers teachers in schools materials to teach, complete syllabuses, materials, lesson plans, and everything for a small fee, which can be reimbursed real easy. Teachers can teach and get graduate credit for teaching. I would recommend any youngster nowadays, anywhere from 12 years old on up, and you can serve as a cadet till you're 21. If you're like a freshman in high school, you're perfect for joining CAP, or a sophomore, let's say. And you can do all sorts of things. I mean, we have encampments, we have activities that you wouldn't believe, overseas field trips, flight academies where you can get solo if you want to, pararescue, PJ, jumper school, things like that.
I can see your enthusiasm about this.
I'm an aerospace education officer for the local Redstone Composite Squadron, which has both senior members and cadets. And we meet every Monday at the Clinton Avenue Church of Christ from 6 to 8. Right. And anybody that wants to come check us out, we would be more than glad to have you come.
That's so meaningful to you, and working with the young people. That means a lot to you.
Yes.
And you've been doing this for several years now?
Since 2010, and my grandson decided to join CAP, and I rejoined with him. Now, he dropped out after a while. He's still in ROTC, but I stayed on with him.
Most of the youngsters, Joe, that you've worked with, eventually do become pilots, or
well,
a lot of them?
you know, they go off and do all sorts of things.
Sure.
We do have cadets that have gone to the service academies or have gone into the military. Like we've had 2 or 3 this past year. They've gone down to Marion Academy to get, which is a prep school for going to one of the academies, whether it be the Coast Guard or the Air Force or the Army.
I want to mention to everyone that we're doing this interview on this date, January 7th, 2016, and in a month or so, Joe and Judy are going to do a lot of celebrating, and I'm going to let you talk about that. It's going to be a happy anniversary for you.
50th anniversary.
Fantastic. And your wife's support, Judy's support, it meant a lot to you through the years, hasn't it?
Oh, yes. Actually, she worked for the Air Force, too.
Yeah.
For quite a few years.
Well, happy anniversary.
Thank you, sir.
I have one more question, and this is always important. I always ask of our people that we talk with, our Valor Award recipients, what would you like for young people, especially our students, to learn and hopefully remember from your military experience?
Well, I personally think it's everybody's obligation to do something for the country, and going into the military is a very good thing to do.
And you'd recommend it. It's not good, maybe not for everyone, but most students would at least look at it and judge for themselves, right? Yeah. Joe, it's been
get that school completed.
That's very important.
As far as you can go.
Joe, it's been a pleasure talking with you today, sir.
Yes,
we appreciate your time and participating in our Price of Freedom interview series and allowing us to preserve your military experience for the people of this community. And thank you, sir, for your service to our country. Appreciate it. If you'd like more information regarding this interview or any interview in our Military Heritage Series, please contact the Madison County Military Heritage Commission website at mcmhc.org.